All right, thank you. Excuse me. First, I do want to thank you, Dr. Outlaw, for this opportunity. This research is very important to me, especially because I have been an operations manager for over 18 years. And during this time period, I've noticed some things around me, specifically lack of understanding of the influence of leadership styles on job satisfaction. Excuse me for my voice. Um, I did find out in my study that there is an established relationship between job satisfaction and leadership styles from a manager's perspective. The three common leadership styles that I used for this research were transformational, transactional, and laissez-faire. So, what was the rationale for my population focus? As I mentioned, a lot of the studies that I reviewed had the perspectives of managers, but they did not have the perspectives of the subordinate or non-management employees, those individuals who actually do the work. Hourly wage workers were used for this research in order to provide some results that could be shared with organizational leaders who may be unaware that their supervisors really may not understand the effects of their leadership styles on employees' job satisfaction. In fact, there was one gap in the literature that revealed an omission of the perspectives of non-management employees on leadership styles. The final act, if I can say that drove me towards this particular topic is my observation of a manager in a department in which I worked in that lost 50% of her non-management employees. I was very close to some of those employees because they previously worked for me. And the common theme for them in terms of why they left was because of her leadership style. So that is why I focused on that. This slide is a graphical depiction of which leadership style best meets subordinate expectations of job satisfaction. And I know that one of the questions may be, why did I choose these three particular leadership styles? And you'll hear later on in the presentation that I did not, in fact, limit it to these leadership styles, even though I will share that these were the most three common ones that I found in my literature. While I did review some other leadership styles, there were many, many reasons why I chose not to utilize those. So, how did I gather this information and what questions did I use to be able to have this conversation with those non-management employees? Um, while there were several questions asked, the main questions that I did ask were, what are some leader characteristics that positively impact your job satisfaction? And how do you actually perceive the differences in job satisfaction based on these three common leadership styles? I did have an opportunity to share with some of them who were not aware of the definition of those leadership styles, and some of them were aware. So if they were not aware, I was able to provide that clarity. And as I just previously mentioned, why did I focus on these three? I actually gathered information on charismatic, situational, servant, authentic. But as I mentioned, for various reasons, these were not selected because of some of the criticism of those styles. So you go through all of this work and you do this, and so what? Then what's going to happen? There are a million research studies on leadership styles and job satisfaction. In fact, I was almost discouraged from doing it because there were so many. But I took that step further and did my own research and found that while there were several, there were very few that focused on the qualitative perspective of actually talking to non-management employees and getting their perspective. So, positive social change. The findings of this study have three implications for social change, especially in the fields of business and finance and education. Supervisors will benefit by improving their approach, and they'll be equipped with findings that job satisfaction can occur either through the sole use of transformational leadership style or actually through a combination of the three leadership styles. Another social change, the one-on-one discussions are going to bring greater value because the supervisor will understand how to lead each employee towards greater job satisfaction. And you say, or you may ask, what does that have to do with social change? Well, when the supervisor-employee relationship improves, you'll reduce job dissatisfaction, you'll minimize turnover, and you'll reduce costs to organizations, which will yield greater production. One of the points that I made was I researched how much turnover costs to an organization, and it's a lot of money. So when organizations are looking to contribute to charities, they reduce their turnover costs. Perhaps that's more money they have for community events and contributing to the community and charities. This study, as most studies, was not without limitation. So there were limitations. First, I utilized the phenomenological method, which, as most of you probably know, is inductive. So you're not trying to prove anything right or wrong. Qualitative studies, most of them, will allow researcher bias, and it presents the perceptions of the subordinate employees. So there was no data collected or completed for leaders and managers. It was just from the non-management employees. The literature review summary, as I mentioned at the top of my presentation, established a relationship between leadership styles and job satisfaction, and numerous included the perception of leaders and managers from hotels and health professionals. There were numerous studies from hotels and health professionals. And as I mentioned, it was noted that while all of these studies had been conducted, there was an absence of studies on followership with leadership from a qualitative perspective. And even though there were maybe 1 to 2 studies that I did find, most of them were, well, not most of them, but they were quantitative studies. And you know that from a qualitative perspective, you're able to, for lack of a better terminology, dig down into having conversations with the person and finding out, why do you feel this way? What is it that makes you feel this way? And that helps you get down to the root cause of a particular situation. So the gaps that I found in the literature, this slide shows 8 gaps that were addressed by the study. I'll just highlight a few, as the lack of qualitative studies involving hourly wage employees, limited research focused on the leadership style that best meets job satisfaction, and limited research on leadership styles and stress reduction. Even though a transformational leader is one who wants to encourage and make sure that they have a great relationship with the team member, everyone is not necessarily that type of employee that's what they want. And so it behooves us to understand that when you are leading individuals, there's not necessarily a one size fits all. That's why I was so excited to hear some of the responses from some of the participants, because I learned some things myself. And one of the things that I learned very early in listening to other people's research was, don't go into a study with your mind made up about what you think the outcome is going to be. You know, it's very difficult to do that, especially when you have a lot of passion around the subject that you're focusing on. But you should always have an open mind in terms of what the research is going to show you. Okay. So as a result of my qualitative study, let's see, this is slide. Okay. Once I gathered the information from the literature search, and I focused on the research questions designed for the study, and I understood some of the gaps from the literature, I selected this phenomenological approach because I needed to examine these psychological concepts, and I needed to isolate and understand the nature of why these relationships existed as they did, and especially as they related to the leadership styles and job satisfaction. So the population that I used, which I won't ever do again, because of some of the challenges that I had. Um, the study was I utilized institutions of higher education in North Carolina, purposive sampling, 25 subordinates that were representative of the hourly wage workers. And you'll see that the sample composition was 44% between 31, 40 years of age, and then more than 75% were female, and more than 40% worked more than 10 years in the current positions. They were obtained anonymously and volunteered for the study. One thing that you will notice is that there were no participants below 31 years of age, not because that was on purpose. It's just by the time I received the forms for individuals to participate, there was no one in that age range. So that's a consideration for a future study if you want to get another characteristic in terms of their feedback. Okay. This is a graphical depiction of the data collection process that I used. It consisted of literature review, historic data, interviews, data saturation. I utilized member checking. The interviews were semi-structured, face-to-face. And to add some value to the validity, there were no pre-coded themes used. Even though the eligibility was at least 18 years of age, as I mentioned, I didn't have anyone that young. And they had to be an hourly wage worker, reported to a first level supervisor, and held at least one annual performance appraisal discussion. The reason that one annual performance appraisal discussion was important because I needed to make sure that they had already engaged in their performance with their supervisors so that they would walk away with some sort of um, idea of what type of leader they felt that they were reporting to. While they probably could determine that, on a daily basis, performance discussions are very detailed and engaged, and I wanted them to have at least met that requirement. This is a graphical depiction of the data analysis process. And the primary data process was a modification of the Van Cam method of analysis. And this was 7 steps of the process and that you see on this slide. I initially used hand coding, which generated lots and lots of papers. But the In Vivo 10 software was very helpful to me. I also utilized an Excel spreadsheet, but the In Vivo software was extremely helpful in the data analysis because it helped me to formulate conclusions, themes, and it counted multiple responses within a theme. So I had to teach myself in how to I had to teach myself in how to use In Vivo, but it was very, very helpful once I figured out how I was able to teach myself. So the next several slides are going to be the results of my finding. And, because of the limited time, I tried to condense some of the findings that you'll see. You also are going to hear themes that are going to be repeated. And the good thing about that is when I was able to draw my conclusions, it was good that I saw those themes repeated over and over again, and they weren't just a one-time theme. The In Vivo software helped me with that in terms of coming to the conclusion in terms of how these non-management employees felt. So this is just one of the questions. How do transformational, transactional, laissez-faire, first level managers influence your job satisfaction? So again, just to summarize, transformational leadership does have a positive influence. Transactional can have a positive or negative. And I know that most people just write off transactional leadership style because of some of the characteristics of it. But 2 of the things that came out was they actually did want to receive corrective feedback. That was one of the surprising things to me that I heard as a reoccurring theme. And the reason they said that is because they do not want to wait until it matters to hear about what they're doing wrong. And then the negative aspect of the transactional leader is the fear of reprisal, especially if they're in a position where they're trying to make a decision. So transactional can either be positive or negative according to these 25 individuals. The same thing with the laissez-faire leadership style, positive or negative influence, some job satisfaction. There were participants who preferred a hands-off approach. And while that's viewed as negative, some participants were saying, when I'm tenured in a position and I'm not just starting to learn my job, I really need someone to work closely with me. But once I understand what I'm doing, I don't really need someone to check in with me every day. The negative aspect of the laissez-faire was the uninvolvement with team members. Some team members, regardless of how well they knew their job, just did not like that aspect. And you'll see some of those statistics later on. Okay, so that's that one. Another question is, what are some leader characteristics that positively influence you? And so, as a summary, what you'll see here is that they prefer supervisors who reward and recognize them for a good job. And one of the specific comments I recall was, it doesn't matter to them if that comment is verbal or if there's some other aspect of showing them how much they appreciate, how much they appreciate it. I did hear a few times participants who said, you can just tell me that I did a good job. Most organizations have some form of recognition, whether that's star awards, star nominations, so forth and so on. So there are opportunities to be able to do that. And that means a lot to team members, especially in a non-management position, because they don't feel appreciated and they know that they are the ones that's doing the job. So they prefer someone who rewards and recognizes them for a good job. They like the freedom to be able to make decisions. They want to be given performance feedback. They want to use the hands-off approach. Another one was practice. They want someone who practices multiple communications and serves as a mentor or coach. And when I say multiple communication, they want the flexibility that if you're busy, I can send you a note and say, can you come see me when you get done? I like to be able to put a note in maybe in your office to say, when you have an opportunity, can you come see me? Or use some of the electronic communication process that's within organizations, whether it be email or communicator or anything like that. Because to them, it says, I'm valuable to you because you're accessible to me. Then one finding from some of the participants was for the supervisor to allow them to work independently. And that once the leader had shared the job with them, and I think I just mentioned that, they want to be left alone and allow them to consult with the leader if needed. Another question, how do they perceive the differences in job satisfaction? So the goal of this question was to understand how employees viewed the differences based on each particular. So one of the most interesting findings from this question was the 68% of respondents who wanted both the positive and corrective feedback. And I think I shared that with you earlier. These employees did not want any surprises at year end. They would rather hear it. Another interesting theme was from employees who acknowledged that leaders should possess the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to adjust their leadership styles, which is dependent upon the design skills of the employee and the situation. And so a couple of participants actually gave me um, some information, or actually a direct quote. And it was so similar that I thought it was great that I could share that with you verbatim. I'm looking at my time. I think leadership style changes as you mature. And I did see the question, did I find the user service impact leaders management style? So maybe this will touch upon that. I think leadership style changes as you mature or as you get older. As I mentioned before, I've been working for a while and I've been working for over 20 years. So the leadership that I needed when I was a teenager in my early 20s is different from what I need now. Back then, I needed someone who would be more of a mentor, someone who would be more engaged in terms of what I needed at work. Whereas now I'm pretty aware of what's needed at work. And I need somebody to provide more guidance in terms of career path and someone to be here when I need issues to be resolved that I can't resolve on my own. So that was a direct quote from one or two. One person directly quoted that, and another individual gave something similar to that. So just some more findings on this slide 17. These are some more responses to how these leadership styles affect you. Shows resistance to change. Transactional is a characteristic of transactional, and 22% said that this negatively influenced them because they don't want leaders who fail to promote unconventional thinking. And then there's a laissez-faire characteristic that allows followers to make decisions. 36% wanted that. Sharing minimal encouragement and guidance. This is laissez-faire. 68% were frustrated with minimal guidance, while the other 32% said they were okay with it. And then maintain a positive relationship. This is a characteristic of transformational. 68%, they want leaders who set high standards for them and not just accept mediocrity from them. And who would, because this contributes to their self-esteem and it also promotes their company loyalty. Okay, slide 18. Continued with findings. Encouraging creativity. That was a positive perspective, and you could look at it as as you could definitely see it as transformational. Slightly maybe transactional, but not really, because transactional just really want you to stick to what it is that the supervisor is asking you to do. So 60% felt this type of environment promoted personal growth, development, and opportunities. Valuing their opinion. 36% felt valued and respected when the supervisors thought enough of them to ask them what they thought. And then public reprimand, I did get some of that. That was probably a characteristic of transactional, especially if you didn't meet the expectation. And this was one of the things that the 50% of the team members who left shared that they felt that they were exposed to. And that wasn't the only reason they left. They just expressed that discontentment over being publicly reprimanded. And some of that I personally heard myself. So 32% of respondents discussed how a leader can negatively influence their job satisfaction if they were publicly reprimanded for inadequately meeting someone's expectation. I don't think that's fun for anyone. So the next slide, some more findings. 100% perceive that transformational leaders influence. 64% like the rewards and feedback dimensions of transactional. So that's why I'm sharing there was part of that was positive and part negative. And then 32% appreciated the hands-off approach from the laissez-faire. So one of the conclusions, and I've not gotten to that yet, is that transformational leaders best meets employee job satisfaction, especially with the reward dimension of it. And then 100% of the hourly wage workers felt that transformational leaders would positively influence them. Only 64% for transactional and 34% for laissez-faire. But the fact still is they didn't just completely write that off, those other two leadership styles. And as I mentioned earlier, it's great if a leader can understand that one size does not fit all. A couple of more slides of findings. Employees prefer a leader who values their opinion. And this is some of the repeating themes that I shared with you that you were going to hear, the rewards and recognition. You also see the causes of their job dissatisfaction. They like someone who is not resistant to change. And you also see again the finding, and these findings were probably to some of the other questions. Just from a time perspective, I just didn't repeat all of those questions. And then the least preferred characteristic of the transactional leader, as you've heard, is for someone who really wants to be in control and who are resistant to change. The last slide for the finding is those specific behaviors that motivates an employee. And you see those there that are listed, and you see some of those themes that are repeated again. And then you also see the 68% that prefer transformational leader. So what does all of this say? So now what? I mean, you've done this study, where are you going to go from here? So one of the things that we were required to do was to share how we could conduct further study with what this is, with what we've done with this study. So I could conduct a further study to determine if, these findings are relevant or similar in other industries. And I could also conduct a further qualitative study comparing the supervisors and the followers' responses just to see what similar responses. I did not do that this time because I wanted the participants to be very open and honest. And one of the things that I would share with you that was really encouraging to me is how excited they were that they knew this was going to be confidential, and how excited they were that someone was asking them what they thought. I would tell you that some of the questions that I asked and some of the responses that I received, there was emotion. I mean, one person actually was in tears when she was saying some things to me about things she felt she had been subjected to. And it was probably one of those individuals who was publicly reprimanded. But the most important piece of it was they were just really excited that someone cared about what they thought. And I attribute that to the fact that there is such a gap in the literature review with qualitative studies who have taught with non-management employees to say, tell us how you want to be led. Instead, there were numerous studies with asking managers what they thought about what the best leadership style was. I am almost there. So the conclusions, which you have heard over and over again throughout the theme of this, is that transformational leaders best meet job satisfaction expectations. Supervisors who focus on motivators and satisfiers will positively impact job satisfaction. Participants prefer positive relationships. They also would prefer a combination of all three of these leadership styles. And then they also want the promotion of creativity and encourage decision making, which positively influences job satisfaction. So when I was speaking to the recommendations for further study, there may be some leaders who are challenged with functioning as a transformational leader. Some leaders may feel like that's just not who they are and that's not their leadership style. And that's why I think it would be important to conduct that further study with the managers and the supervisors. Okay, so I shared those conclusions. And I think if I can stop doing the wrong thing with this, I think that that is the end of my presentation. And it is. So are you sharing these questions because you would like for me to discuss them now?
Yes, you can address them at any point.
Okay, so let me try to go up to, is there an, okay. Did you find the years of service impacted the leader's management style, the years of service? Well, I can speak to that from what the participants shared. Now, in terms of the leader's management style, I don't know. I have to think through trying to answer that one. The participants themselves, in terms of their years of service, I will tell you that without looking at it statistically and remembering some of the responses and some of the years of service, because I actually had participants that had been in their job a little over a year and they had only conducted one performance appraisal, as I mentioned, to those who had been in their job 10 years. Those individuals who had less years of service, they did prefer a transformational leader. And here's the reason why. They weren't quite sure what they were doing. They needed that encouragement. They needed that motivation. They needed the supervisor to really lead and guide them on a regular basis. Whereas individuals that have been in their job 10 years or more, they're the ones that I remember that wanted that combined leadership style. If I know what I'm doing, nope, I need the hands-off approach. That's laissez-faire. If I do a good job, yes, I want you to tell me I did a good job, even though I've been here 10 years. That's a characteristic of transformational. And whatever you do, don't wait until I get through to my performance appraisal to tell me I didn't do something right. I want that corrective feedback. So that is the characteristic of transactional. So I may not have addressed the direct question, but that's the best response. And in vivo is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you kind of brought up another point in my mind that those who want to be kind of hands off, I have seen that in my own personal, uh, coming through, that when you do that, or if that's your personality or your preference, you're viewed as not being a team player.
You mean when there is a hands-off approach from the leader?
From the employee.
Well, the perspective from which I was referring to hands off is for the leader to have a hands off approach because the employee is independent, they're a self starter, they come in, they know what their job is, so they don't need, for lack of a better terminology, the micromanaging. When I say hands off, that's the hands off perspective in which I am speaking. Now, I don't necessarily mean hands off in the perspective of you're not going to be a team player with other, you're not going to go collaborate with your peer and ask them, what do you think about this deal? Or what do you think about this loan? How do you think I should handle that?
Okay.
Not that hands off, because I completely agree with you.
Okay.
That person would be viewed as not being a team player.
Okay.
Yeah. So the third question is, what's the best advice to give employees in a position where they don't feel appreciated or feel abused? Some don't speak for fear of losing their job or situations getting worse, and I completely agree. If an employee does not have the relationship that they can, and a lot of them don't, and trust me, I'm not saying this as if it's as common as apple pie and ice cream, because I recently had a manager who left that would just refuse to receive feedback from me, and not just from me, from anybody. Even if that person was wrong in their assessment and what they did, once they realized that they were wrong, they never apologized, never admitted to you they were wrong. Those are people that you're just going to have to make a decision whether you're going to grin and bear it or you're going to try to go somewhere else. There is the route of going through HR, but there's also a consequence to that if that's what you choose to do. For me, it just happened on its own that this person ended up stepping down and taking another job. But I'll tell you that part of the reason I felt that happened was because of the observance of how she was treating employees. So some things will take care of itself, some of them won't. I think we all can make that decision as long as you understand the consequence of any of those decisions that you make. I would at least give it a first try. I would at least. Some of the things that I think happens when employees are trying to tell or trying to communicate with supervisors is you have to know, to me, how to say it, even though this person wouldn't even let me say it at all. So the advice that I've given my staff is if I've done something that makes you uncomfortable, if you're uncomfortable telling me that, just tell me from the perspective of how it made you feel. That way you don't feel as if you're attacking me. So if I said something or I did something in a meeting, you can come to me and say, hey, when this happened, I need to tell you how it made me feel. That's what I've given them because I don't want anyone not being able to tell me if I've done something that makes them uncomfortable. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that what I said was wrong or right. They can share with me how it made them feel. I still may do the same thing, but at least we can open up the dialogue about it and maybe I can figure out a different way to say it. So that's, that's not as specific because there's so many different variables in situations in terms of, and plus there are so many sides to another story, and there are two sides to the story, but I would at least give it that first try because even though this person did not receive feedback from me, the only reason I knew she wouldn't, because I tried to give it to her. So when I realized that she was just not receptive and open to it, I just didn't try anymore. and I just did the best job that I could. Is leadership training mandated for managers, or is that optional as professional development? Well, I will tell you, I work for a bank, and leadership training I will say, I won't say mandated, but it is not an option. You know, every manager that reports to me, and I have six managers that report to me. There are some leadership classes that they have to take when they first come. Now, I will tell you that there are no classes that will prepare you to lead people sometimes. You just have to use good decision making skills. But we do have some transformational training in my organization. There's some situational leadership training in the organization. And as I mentioned, there are some courses that they have to take before they even start to lead the team. There are some courses that they have to take. So I think I have 8 minutes.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Since there's so few of us, I can grant audio if you wish.
Okay, what's up to them?
We grant audio and see what happens. Christy says thanks.
Yes, I would love any feedback. I did try my very best to condense this as much as I could. So if there are any questions on my presentation or any feedback you'd like to give me, I appreciate it. Oh, are you mentioning that you like that approach because it reduces the tension in terms of just tell me how, someone saying how it made them feel? Yeah, that's good. Yeah, yeah.
You have audio,
Oh,
Christy, if you want to say something.
okay. So the the survey is up now.
Yes, I just pushed the survey out to your browsers, and so if you would fill that out, it might take you 10, 15 seconds, very short. I'm
Okay,
pretty sure that Dr. Niels will appreciate your feedback.
I
And
absolutely would.
okay, and again, if you need the handout, it's at the bottom right of your screen. Just click on that and click download files, and it'll come to your computer. And we'll give it another couple seconds if anyone wants to say anything. I granted audio